Well, let's take a closer look at the market leader for the Qatar Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, Luxembourg, who, of course, is trained by Aidan O'Brien.
Yeah, so Luxembourg has sort of become the momentum horse, the now horse of the Arc. He's always been on the periphery, in the background of the championship events this summer, but for one reason or the other, it's only now that he's starting to come to himself. And he's the most important horse, I think, at Ballydoyle, and this is the most important race for Ballydoyle in Europe, at least.
Do you think it's to his benefit that he's missed that early part of the summer and come back a fresh horse for the back end, really?
Because almost inadvertently, it's the classic French approach of a summer off and then warming up for the big race in October. But let's have a look at Aidan's record in the Arc, because he's thrown a lot of darts at the Arc over the years, as many as 53 runners in total in the Arc de Triomphe. Now, only 2 wins. I say only, but when you consider that's from a size of 53 arrows, that's not the biggest return, and 5 places.
And also when you consider into that his record in races like the Irish Derby, the Derby,
that's right,
the King George, it's almost a surprise that he's only got the 2 on the board there.
Is it surprising that he's only had 1 favourite for the Arc as well?
Yeah.
That surprised me. Yeah, that was High Chaparral when he was a 3-year-old. So only 5 places, 2 winners. But it's a race that Aidan has targeted with regularity but hasn't hit the bullseye too often. But he has got an unusual horse for this year's Arc, and a horse with that classic approach that's almost been trained for the Arc. Let's go back to his 2-year-old season, because this was effectively the end of phase 1 of his career. So he'd won the Beresford and he was 4-6 for the Doncaster Vertem Futurity. And even though this was going back in time, his style actually hasn't changed all that much. He's a momentum builder, Martin. He's a grinder more than a glider, and he's always had space in his races so far. So this was the end of phase 1, which brings us to what happened at the start of the season, because he was big noise around Ballydoyle and much of the talk around the European racing circuit, in fact, for going for the classics.
And he went for the classic. He was over the mile for his comeback run, and things didn't go his way. He got a bit of interference early, and Aidan said subsequently Ryan was lucky to stay on him.
Yeah, he was stumbled at the start and was up against 2 pretty big Godolphin horses at the time, Caribus and Native Trail. But what's interesting regards how this horse has always been viewed, I've picked out a quote for each of our protagonists. But this quote from Aidan O'Brien, it came before the Guineas, it came in April. And I think this is telling, Martin, about his future. Because in April, he said, it's a big ask for him, Luxembourg, to start in the Guineas when he's going to be a middle-distance horse this year. And that's the critical point, isn't it? That we've got a horse here who's bred to be a 1.5 mile horse, designed to be a 1.5 mile horse, trained to be a 1.5 mile horse. And 1 year, 2 months and 17 days on from his debut, he now gets the chance to flex those 1.5 mile muscles in the Arc de Triomphe.
And with that quote in mind, think back to then Leopardstown and what he did there against Verdini, a French Derby winner, Coral Eclipse winner, Onesto, who was coming from the Grand Prix de Paris as well. He's managed to beat those horses over a distance that we think is maybe not going to be as optimum.
That's right. So this is the Irish Champion Stakes. There's Onesto over on the far side. And even though it was only a half-length win and he was hard work to gain that win, it's the context of what went on before that. Because Aidan O'Brien himself admitted that he had to rush him to that, including winning the Royal Whip. So with Luxembourg, that was ahead of schedule, effectively, wasn't it? Because he was behind schedule with what happened in the Guineas and subsequent to the Guineas as well. So really impressive by Luxembourg that he could beat that collection of horses on that day, given the things that went wrong for him through the summer. So every time he comes to the track, he improves his rating, and now he gets the chance to express himself over 1.5 miles.
And you think back to the Royal Whip there and the way he ran that day, it's still the genius of Aidan O'Brien that he's managed to get... We could watch that and think, don't like that very much, but it's the genius of O'Brien that he's managed to get him to step forward on his next start, and maybe again at the weekend.
I mean, it's not overstating it to say that this could be Aidan O'Brien's greatest achievement, Luxembourg, given the setbacks and issues he's had. So this is just an illustration of how he's improved every time he comes to the track. 111 in the Beresford, 115 in the Futurity, as we saw, then 116 over an adequate trip in the Guineas. The Royal Whip was purely a means to an end, but then 122, defeating Verdini, Mishrif, Onesto and Co. in the Irish Champion. Now, let's focus on that figure for a second, because that 122, it's not going to be enough to win an average Arc. He's going to have to put another £5 on top of that. It's normally 126, 127 for an arc, and rare occasions you need 130. But that is the key point with him. It's projecting forward every time he comes to the track.
If you had your old Timeform hat on, if you were giving that a rating of 122, would you be a 122 with a P?
It'd have to be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because we're back to the point with him, and this is the very heart of the matter with Luxembourg, is that he's only now doing what he's bred for. Everything about him, including his sire Camelot, suggests that a mile and a half, he won't just stay it, but he'll thrive for it. So that's the positives with Luxembourg. There is a premium on his price because he's now favourite, and the favourite for the Arc is normally the dominant force rather than the developing force. And he is still a developing force to some extent, and Longchamp will ask new questions of him. But it's hard not to think that he's not going to improve by at least another £5, £6, even £7. Now he gets a mile and a half.
I wonder when the last time was you had an Arc favourite in the week of the race that hadn't ran over the trip. I guess most horses that would be ahead of the market would have been a mile and a half, wouldn't they?
Yes. I know that the last Arc winner to have not won over a mile and a half was Saki. But he'd finished second in the Derby.
OK.
But that's the last Arc winner who hadn't won previously over a mile and a half. So that's the payoff now with Luxembourg. It's the potential against, to some extent, the price, because he's found his way towards the top of the market. And the other important thing with him is that when you go back and watch his races, Ryan knows him really well, and he's been able to do things when Ryan wants, apart from in the Guineas, where obviously they had that stumble. But he's never really been in a field size where pressure points will be pushed by different horses at different stages in the race. And a big field will ask new questions of Luxembourg, along with he is still coming in quite cold to the extent of inexperience for a race of this nature. So that's the payoff with Luxembourg. But can you understand why he's favourite early in the week for the big day on Sunday?
Very much so.
Yeah.
The connections, the profile, and what he's managed to achieve over what we're thinking might not be his best distance.
So that's the key point with Luxembourg. Only now, 14 months on from his debut, is he doing what he's bred for over a mile and a half, and that could be transformative for him.